hit the button. Yep. So
Sorry,
thank
I
you.
didn't
No,
hear from him
no,
either. All right, sorry about that.
you're more experienced at this than me, so I appreciate the reminder. Okay, Will, it's all
Okay.
yours.
I'm so ready. I'm so ready. I think I've looked at this title for like 9 months now. Oh my gosh, yeah. And I love it in the fact that I'm talking about not maybe a patient I see, but their family, the larger family system. So as I talk, I want you guys to think about that larger family system. So the title is Sister to Sister, a phenomenological study of women's experiences of having a sister with autism. And it's based on the female autism phenotype, and I will explain that in slide 2. That's a lot, but as I've come to learn, it's common to have these super long titles. So let's see if I can move forward. Perfect. Just a quick intro. I've been at Liberty since 16 for my PhD. I was previously there for my master's, and you guys, you've talked about dissertation since day one. I mean, it's like it's important. You need to be thinking about it. Boom, boom, boom. And I kind of felt like autism was always going to be it. But as I took these classes and saw, narrowing it down, qualitative research, this qualitative measure rose to the top pretty quickly. But I found this article from 15, where they had interviewed parents, and I said I could do that. That's meaningful research to actually talk to a family member of somebody with autism. And I went looking, and it was like, they had talked to mom and dad, brothers about brothers, siblings, and just the process of elimination. I finally got to sisters about sisters. So that's where this idea came from. A whole, a whole, what has that been? 5 years now? A whole 5 years of looking at this kind of material. So the purpose of this study is to see what these women who have a sister with autism can tell us about autism, about the living experience of being the sibling, a neurotypical sibling of somebody with autism, and what they can add to our understanding of a possible female phenotype of autism. If I'm talking too fast, slow me down. I can feel it happening already. My research questions, I really started off with 4, and I'll explain the 5th one in just when I get to the end of the list. But the 4 research questions came from a piece of research I read by Laura Hull et al. There was more people in that piece of research out of the UK. And she had written this piece of research and published in 2020. So this is new, cutting edge. This is here now kind of research. This is not something left over from decades ago. People in the UK and the US are asking these questions like, do women with autism present significantly, uniquely different from males with autism? And if so, in what ways? And she postulated, or her group postulated, these first 4. And so I turned them into these research questions. One is about relationships, social relationships, namely. The second one is about interests. And again, these interests being uniquely different from males. The third is about co-occurring disorders. She said that in her work, it's always anxiety, depression, or an eating disorder. They seem to be the common factors. Fourthly, just acting differently around others. And previous research had termed this phenomenon camouflaging. So you'll hear me talk more about camouflaging as we move through this. But the fifth one was really interesting because this research question arose during my first interview. And typically, best practice is, you pilot a piece of research. You have one person, you pilot it just to see what rolls out. There's always going to be something that surprises you. And this was one of those things that surprised me. This question came at the end of the interview. I'd been interviewing the young lady for about an hour. And it was simply, in what ways has having a sister with ASD made you who you are today? And it just blew up. I mean, it turned into its own segment, its own theme. And all of my interviewees talked extensively about how they are who they are today because they grew up with this woman, this sister who has autism. So those served as my 5 research questions, things I was looking for. And you'll see in a minute, those became the superordinate themes. The significance of the study. Let me move you guys over a little bit here. The significance of the study goes back to the theory that women with autism present significantly different, unique from males with autism. So all of these significant mile markers hit on that. It's a talk or an encouragement into the profession of, we need to look at women and say, if we consider a female phenotype, a unique female phenotype, does that mean that more women will be diagnosed with autism? And it's very likely they would be. As we know, research has pointed out that males, the male to female ratio is super high, like 4-to-1 male to female ratio of being diagnosed with autism. And of course, the question is why? Are we missing something? Is it something beyond us in psychology? Is it something genetic? We don't know, but we do know that's a really weird ratio. And if we look at one of our theories, the autism phenotype, we can say maybe it's because they're presenting differently. Another thing is it encourages different treatment approaches, and you'll see me in this research really encouraging a systems approach, a family approach, where it's more than just treating the woman with autism. We want to involve their parents, and obviously in this case their sisters or their siblings. I want researchers to look into this too. So that's part of the significance of the study. It gives researchers a new area to look into. The 5 guiding or the 5 research questions I presented, and then practitioners looking at those co-occurring disorders. Too often we see somebody with a developmental disability and just assume that it's the developmental disability, and future practitioners need to be conscientious that it could be a unique disorder like an eating disorder, like an anxiety. And I think finally I talked about camouflaging again, this purposely trying to appear neurotypical, and how that can be used in therapy. It could possibly become a powerful tool as it's used as a goal or a motivational factor for women with autism, even though it's very difficult for them. And I'll touch on that also. The theoretical underpinnings of this and the conceptual framework I'll explain in depth, but just quickly hit on this. This was a piece of IPA research, interpretative phenomenological analysis. And the goal of that, I love to say, it's the researcher trying to make sense of the subject as the subject tries to make sense of their world. And I read that somewhere and I said, that's it perfectly. So in this work, I'm looking at these women who are trying to make sense of their world, their life as adult women with an adult sister with ASD. The theory again is that these women with autism present uniquely and significantly different from males with autism, and that affects a system, not just them individually, but their siblings, their parents, the larger system. And in this, I'm going to use semi-structured interviews, or you'll see that I use semi-structured interviews, to gain that experience. I recorded it and then I transcribed it and then I read over it a lot. I read those interviews a lot. But quickly, the methods was the semi-structured interviews, and then the interpretative phenomenological analysis, I should correct that, which were transcribed. Which, by the way, that transcribing took a lot of time. That was huge, taking hours of interviews and then typing it and then reviewing it and then typing it. Man, I mean, it was good, but it was a lot. My goodness. So let's talk about the 2 things. Let's talk about what is the female autism phenotype, and then we'll talk about interpretative phenomenological analysis. So first, Hull's theory, Laura Hull's theory from 2020 says that a unique female autism phenotype includes how the person with autism relates socially, how their social interests are unique, different from what males with autism have, internalizing problems, how they are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder, and then fourthly, the camouflaging effect, or these efforts to appear neurotypical to cover autism presentation, autism symptoms. It seems, according to her work, it seems that women are better at camouflaging their autism symptoms than males are, especially in social situations where females are expected to act a certain way. Think school, think church, think parties. I go through all that, but this theory was not the only way to describe the female autism phenotype. This was just the most concise and the most recent with 2020, which was, of course, when I started this. The second thing, interpretative phenomenological analysis. Its approach has been around quite a while, but it is, again, this idea of me, the researcher, trying to make sense of this subject as this subject tries to make sense of her world, which in this case is having a sister with autism. When you see my demographic page, you'll understand what I mean when I talk about purposeful sample, but we want it to be homogeneous enough that the results can be attributed to something other than a variation in. So in this case, I drew chiefly from Georgia. So there's not people from the Northeast or the West. Also, my sample, we'll see in a minute, their ages are pretty close. I think the average age was like 25. But finally, the goal of the work was to make sense of these women's, the words, their expressions, how they understood the world in light of having a sister with autism. And they talked extensively about how it had affected them, the things that they had done growing up to either connect with their sister, to make their own way in the world, how to make this balance between family and social, being that sister was not super social. And I knew I would be saying this phrase over and over again, but it was fascinating. It was just so fascinating to hear these women tell their story about their life, about the first 20 or 25 years of their life, growing up with a sister who has autism. This is the long section, lots of findings, but again, super fascinating. I feel like I'm gonna say that a lot, but it was enjoyable to look back on the finished product and go, yeah, wow, that took me by surprise. That was interesting. The findings, I established 6 superordinate themes from the 4 transcripts. The transcripts produce, of course, page after page after page of material, incredible amounts of material. But the first 4 are in line with Hull's theory of a female autism phenotype, the social relationships, the interests specific to the sister with ASD, and then the shared interest between these sisters, which that all by itself was just interesting. It was super interesting. And thirdly, these internalizing problems like anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. Fourthly, that camouflaging or trying to appear neurotypical. 5 and 6 were unique to this piece of research. These are superordinate themes that arose from the transcripts of their own. As I did the work, as I went through and I was looking for themes, and I pulled these themes together and I grouped them into superordinate themes. And the 5th one was this, how the neurotypical sister interacted with ASD. And by way of example, 3 of the 4 subjects talked about how friends, after they had established, I have a sister with ASD, would come to them and ask them questions about ASD. So nothing related directly to the sister, but to my subject and her interaction with the world out there, and how people, would pick their brains, so to speak, in that example. And lastly, autism in the family, where I touched on how it had a larger impact. For example, one of the issues was that the autistic sibling tended to take precedent over the other siblings and their needs. Another example was 3 of the 4 subjects also reported developmental disabilities in another member of their family, father, mother, brother, somebody else also had these. So autism's bigger impact on the family aside from the sister with ASD. So the findings were, there's a lot to go there. I love it. I really enjoyed it. But quick demographics, you can see the participants were simply numbered, their ages. I noted the biological relationship, race, but I noted the biological relationship because I found that fascinating. The participant number 1, her father, they shared a father, but 2 through 4, of course, they shared a father and a mother. I noted the birth order, which is always interesting, and the original diagnosis. So the homogeneity of my group. All of the women were originally diagnosed with Asperger's, which we know is high-functioning autism. And the last category, which it made itself known throughout the research, when these girls were diagnosed. So these women talked about their sister being diagnosed in childhood or being diagnosed in adulthood. And the theme for the adult ones was always the struggle at getting the diagnosis, the struggle at understanding why their sister acted the way they did. And then once the sister got the diagnosis, the relief from having a label and going, okay, that's what it is. That makes sense. I go look that up on the internet and I read about Asperger's and I go, that's my sister. It's fascinating to see that transition, as I talked about, from when we were young to when we were an adult and she was finally diagnosed. But a good bit of demographic information is always helpful. I keep having to move you guys around. I guess I should have put it all on one side of the slide. But let's talk about the findings individually, the 6 superordinate themes. But I was trying to think of a good way to start that. But social relationships, 2 parts to this: the sister with autism's social relationships, and then the relationship with the subject, how that played out publicly and privately. Every one of them, all 4 of them, talked about how their sister doesn't have any close friends and how they would try to be that for their sister at some level. But inevitably it would exhaust them, and they were not, it was not a reciprocal relationship. It was not a give and take, and that the neurotypical sister, would actually have to leave and go find a connection. It's almost like a feeling of abandonment, like I've left my sister here. They talked about sisters now, presently, and their functioning levels. Some mentioned that their functioning level was pretty poor as an adult. Some mentioned it was fair as an adult. But they all talked about those challenges of looking into the future and going, what am I going to have to provide for my sister going forward? So it's fascinating. The sisters, the autistic sister, the relationship between the autistic and the neurotypical sister, and then this expectation of, what my part is to play in her life. Secondly is the interests. And as I mentioned earlier, this was really interesting to me because every one of the women talked about trying to be interested in the thing that their sister was interested in. They tried to connect. They were doing the neurotypical thing of saying, hey, I like that too. Let's relate based on that. And every time they talked about how it blew up in their face because the sister's interests were such that it was almost like coveted. This is mine. I don't want to share it with you. They were able to report that some interests that were continued to be shared, but it was almost like developmentally, it was like parallel play. Like you can join me in watching this favorite TV show of mine, but I won't join you in watching it as well. One woman relayed the story of how they had found a show on whatever, Netflix or whatever, and they were watching it together. And then one day she came home from work and her autistic sister had just watched the entire season without her. And her autistic sister didn't understand why that hurt her neurotypical sister's feelings. It's this, yeah, I love this and you love this. Let's love it together. And the autistic sister's like, that's not important to me at all. Fascinating findings on interest moving forward. Internalizing problems. And as mentioned before, Laura Hull's research from 2020 touched on 3: anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. Other pieces of research talking about a female autism phenotype have touched on other disorders, but this piece of research gave me a good outline for my dissertation, so I stuck with it. Every one of the women reported these symptoms in their own sister. Some or all. One of them, interestingly, reported it was her eating disorder that led to treatment that led to her diagnosis with ASD as an adult. So again, it's hearkening back to this. We're seeing this problem in practice, but there's so much more underneath it. And without that treatment for the eating disorder, this woman would have never been diagnosed with ASD. They all talked about the concept of tantrums, which it was weird for me to hear that as the interviewer. I'm hearing these women say the word tantrum over and over again, and it sounded juvenile. It's like, isn't there a better way to explain it? But then when they explained what was actually going on, they're talking about their sister having a meltdown at the car after the evening party at the neighbor's house. And they're explaining how these women are, it's like they did the camouflaging thing and now they're exhausted and they just can't play the game anymore. And they need to leave and they're not being allowed to leave. And their only recourse is this bubbling up and breaking down. And I thought that concept of a tantrum, in light of research that says that camouflaging is exhausting, gives us a good direction to go in research-wise in a future sense. So that's one of my recommendations for future research. Lastly, I made a note here that someone else in their family also had symptoms of autism or another developmental disorder, which I'll hit on that with my 6.2 also. But each one of the women, 3 of the 4 women said either their mother, their father, their brother, somebody had some, if not all, of the symptoms. And one of the subjects, her father had been formally diagnosed with ASD, so internalizing problems. And then camouflaging. This was a super interesting topic. This is brand new. As you can see from 2016 when it was first published, this idea of camouflaging is only about 5 years old. The concept in the research literature is just brand new. Not that we've not seen it before, it's just not been quantified until about 2016 when it was first published and stated as people with autism camouflaging. Now, I'll explain it to you quickly, and you'll be like, yes, that's obvious. But as you know in research, until it's quantified and published, it's not. But camouflaging is understood as attempting to appear neurotypical so as to lead others to believe there isn't a problem. Women, by the research that we've done over the past 5 years, women are traditionally better at it than men. They're better at hiding those autism symptoms, those restrictive and repetitive behaviors. In my interviews, what I found was extensive camouflaging by all the autistic sisters. They were doing it at school, they were doing it at church. Again, they were doing it at the piano recital, they were doing it at the dance recital. They were all doing it, but the hallmark was they could not do it for long. A matter of fact, one of the complaints from one of the subjects was she will do right, she'll behave, i.e. camouflage, for others, but she won't do that for us at home. And my subject's lack of understanding of fatigue and exercise, I'm doing this, but I can only hold it up so long, withstanding, shows us that camouflaging is honestly a very tiring endeavor for these women with autism. They can't maintain that level of presentation indefinitely. They just cannot, and that makes it one of the possible hallmarks for a female autism phenotype, is to see this camouflaging. They reported that the camouflaging led to fatigue, which then led to tantrums, which we understand which I theorize is one of those behaviors. They're an escape behavior. If I tantrum, you will take me out of this situation where I'm super stressed, and I can retreat back into my place. All of the women, finally, all of the women admitted that these were overt attempts to appear neurotypical. And I say that differently from the first comment because in that scenario, the autistic sister would allow her neurotypical sister to come in and help her with hair, to help her with makeup, to help her with clothes, especially as they moved into high school and college. They would want their camouflaging to look more convincing, and so they would try to dress like peers. They would try to talk like peers. One young lady, I am not tech savvy, guys. I don't know TikTok, but she told me that her sister would watch TikTok, memorize the lines that she perceived as funny, and then go into her social setting, college or whatever it is, and using these TikTok lines. And she said it came to a head whenever I brought my husband over, and the first thing out of my sister's mouth was some comment off TikTok, and my husband and I are looking at her going, what is going on? But that was one of the things with camouflaging. I've looked on the internet here and I found and I've learned, and now I'm going to regurgitate. I'm going to repeat that. So that is camouflaging. Finally, the next two, which came from this research uniquely, was the neurotypical sisters' interaction with autism. And I guess an example is the best way to explain this. One of the young ladies in the research talked about how after she learned that, as a child, after she learned that her sister had autism, she was just curious. She's like, okay, what is this? And so she went to school and volunteered to do a book report on autism. And that book report led to people asking her questions. It led to other opportunities to learn about and share autism. but I'm looking at my sister and I'm sympathizing and I want to know more. I want to care. I want to find out what this is, and I want to find out what I can do. And so these women did a variety of things, including their own research, including volunteering at things like Autism Speaks, just getting involved in sacrificing themselves, moving out of their personal world and getting involved in somebody else's world. In this case, what it's like for other people with autism. Additionally, they talked about being used by their sister as an extension or as an outlet for stress. They were there and they were willing to take this, so to speak, feeling like this is what they needed to do to build some sort of connection between them and their autistic sister. Finally, they, and I say they, I mean sister and parents, there was a blurred boundary there. And I'll talk about this more with my next point too, where the parents tended to give more attention, give more emotional energy, give more time to the child with autism, to the exclusion of the other siblings. And what this led to is my subjects feeling like it's their job to sacrifice. It's their job to kind of give up what they want so that there's peace in the house, so that there's, mom and dad are happy. It led to parentification. And we talk about parentification in the sense of adults, but obviously the two that were, knew their sister was autistic as a child, they got parentified even as a child. One of the women sharing her resentment about this talked about how she has a terrible relationship with her parents now because she can't go over there without getting dumped on. She goes over there and then it's like, you're here to give us a break. And it's upsetting in the family system. And that's one of the things I'll talk about in my recommendations, having therapy and counseling approaches that are family and systems oriented. Finally, autism in the family, I kind of touched on that just then, so I guess that's a pretty good transition. Again, they felt like their sister's issues took precedence. One of the young ladies talked about how she believed her older brother has enough of the symptoms of autism to be diagnosed because she's seen it in her sister, but he was ignored to the extent that her sister took precedent, right? She was diagnosed first, so she took precedent. It's at this point that 3 of the 4 women talked about how they could spot autism a mile away, and we've all had clients that we've interacted with who it's their life experience to be around a certain disorder, and they feel like when they see it, they know it. And these women all, well, a majority, not all of them, a majority of them said, yes, if I saw it right now, I would know it because of this kind of lifetime interaction, family interaction. And then finally, family mental health was a major issue. Not only were there other family members with autism, there were other family members with depression, there were other family members with self-harming behaviors, there were other family members just with life stresses that these women felt were downplayed or ignored or treated as less important simply because sister had the tantrum issue. She had the big issue. She was the identified patient, I guess is the way to say that. So that is the 6 superordinate themes. That's the 6 findings. What I'm going to do lastly is, of course, recommendations for the research, and I will try not to belabor it. There's obviously a lot. After I've invested, 12 months into this, I could talk about it way too long. We've all been there. But first and foremost, recommendations. Let's just go down a few of these. Social skills is huge. We do social skills at the clinic. Social skills groups at the clinic I work at. It is particularly helpful for these women who are already high functioning autism. As they were diagnosed before DSM-5, they all 4 were diagnosed with Asperger's. So social skills groups are huge. Family therapy is also huge, namely having that family come in there and learn how to balance their life. Balance the sister with ASD's needs with the needs of the other children that you have, with the needs of your marriage. Their family therapy is just, it would be incredibly helpful in these situations, especially with very young women or young ladies with ASD. I want to go back to the shared interest point that I made earlier because I found that very fascinating. These women, they sacrifice so much to try to connect with their sister with autism. I mean, they were watching shows that they didn't care anything about. One told me they were pirating TV shows off the internet just because it was what she wanted to watch. And I do not encourage pirating material off the internet, but it's fascinating how much of a sacrifice these women were willing to make for their sister with autism. And so shared interest could be great as a goal for the family therapy. It's like, you want to connect in this way, let's do these things to help you connect. Fourthly, I talk about investigating the connection. We're always looking for the connection. It's like, what is that connection between anxiety and female autism, depression, female autism, the eating disorder? Why are these disorders co-occurring? Fifthly, camouflaging research is kind of a hot topic. It's weird for me to say that because I've been reading about it for a year, and I realize you guys have not. But this popularity kind of thing, it goes with wherever we focus our attention. And camouflaging is kind of the rage within this autism circle right now. People are doing research on it, and I think it could be used meaningfully as a tool in therapy, as a change agent. Women are already invested in appearing neurotypical for as long as they're able to. Why not capitalize that? Why not integrate it into therapy? And sixthly, individual counseling for the actual woman. I think the overarching emotion I got from most of this is frustrating, especially the women whose sisters were diagnosed as adults. I'm frustrated with this. I don't know what to do with this. Finally somebody figured it out. Why didn't this happen earlier? They're in a state or a place where they need that kind of support. They need therapy, somebody to step in and guide them through, help them work through their hurts, habits, and hangups, to quote CR. And so individual therapy for these adult women who have a sister with autism. And finally, psychoeducation in general. So psychoeducation for the parents. I didn't know this, but teachers, all these people they come into contact with in the sense of looking at autism for females as unique or significantly different from autism for males. Not to expect the restrictive patterns of behaviors like these girls are going to be watching the ceiling fan spin. Instead, expecting them to try to fit in. They're going to go above and beyond. They're going to dress up. They're going to copy speech they hear on the internet. They're going to try their best to look neurotypical. And just to relay one more story from the research, one of the girls was talking about how her sister hit high school and all of a sudden she started dressing like a beauty queen. She went over the top with makeup, with lipstick, doing her hair up every day with expensive clothes because that's what the magazine portrayed. And the reason I tell you that story is because the magazine is going to portray a picture that's not real. Very few of us dress like the magazine every day. But these women with autism, as they camouflage, they're looking for those places to, they're looking for those images to copy. And so in this example, it was hilarious at the time, is this woman's, she's a high schooler dressing up like a beauty queen because that's the image she got. So psychoeducation to help these parents, maybe even something super simple like show them pictures of how people dress appropriately for school, appropriately for church, appropriately for the carnival, versus just letting the 14-year-old roam the internet looking for examples of what normal behavior is. A few references for you guys. The first one is the female, the camouflaging one, and the second one is the piece of research I used. So I'm going to stop talking because I feel like I've talked non-stop for a really long time, and ask any questions. Well, I definitely appreciate all you guys listening to me. And
absorbing. We're absorbing the magnitude of this. Yes. I want to direct for our guests who are here first, since they have to hop off in a little bit while the committee discusses, but for Dr. Raque. And I'm sorry, Deb, I can't remember your name, but just hearing this, I'm not sure if this is your first time hearing or being familiar with Will's work. Just comments or questions that you guys have. Will.
Well, for me, it's very helpful to hear that whole concept of camouflaging now.
Yes.
And to focus on systems and family therapy, because I'm really big in our clinic about seeing families and, working as a whole within that system. And I was clicking off in my head how this can be so useful to me and a couple of families I'm already working with. And to be able to take that perspective and put it in about siblings and what that's like and their camouflaging. The member of the female who has the autism, and also the psychoeducation part, how much more there is to be done. I think with working with the significant other adults in these people's life and their siblings too. So thank you, that was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I agree. The camouflaging, that's definitely interesting. It's been my experience working with females with ASD that definitely are oftentimes misidentified and go through a series of evaluations and treatment and whatnot, only to find out as adults that, oh, by the way, you might have an autism spectrum disorder, which can be freeing, but it's also kind of frustrating that they aren't identified earlier. So I definitely, as Will knows, he's familiar. We do a lot of assessment. Fortunately, we have a person here now that is, really adept at doing assessments, which I think is important, is early identification, because then you can intervene, at that family systems level that you talked about, which I think is great. Refreshing to hear that there's more people that are taking that approach. You as well, Deb. That's great. And and like you said, the psychoeducational component is really good. But I'd like to say for sure, I'm not surprised at all that Will did an excellent job. Yeah, it was really good. A lot of good information. I loved a lot of the presentations and the points that you gleaned from your qualitative study with these folks. So excellent job. And like I said, I'm not surprised. I've worked with him for a number of years and found him to be, very, very professional and good at what he did with us in our practice. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
It's like, do I need to mute myself?
No, you're fine, Will. Go ahead, Dr. Thomas.
Sorry, my apologies for being late. I could give reasons, but it would matter. Will, I think this was a tremendous job. Qualitative is so much harder, as you know now, than others. I guess we could say it's fascinating what you found. Since that's your favorite word. But just what I've got isn't so much with what you found, but just some speculative questions, because often when we present our data, we need to be able to think the what ifs, like in carrying it further. So just a few questions around that. One is, if this was brothers of either a brother or a sister that had ASD, what do you think may be different, if anything?
Yeah, I think brothers would have tried less to connect. They certainly would have not have been the person that the sister went to for, how should I dress? How should I talk? I think there would have been less of an emotional investment from the outset, because there is a gender identification, right? I'm male and identify with my brother, or female and I identify with my sister, and I would have expected that to be a much bigger factor. there was plenty of there was a piece of research I read where the subjects were both male and female, but the sibling had autism, and it. Not that I'm not quoting it saying it said this, but that was kind of one of those findings. It was less emotional attachment. So I think the emotional attachment portion would have been there. On the other side, if it were a boy and his autistic brother, there may have been some more ownership. And I say that because I have a younger brother, and I can remember doing, getting in fights for him. Raque, I may have defended him. In my own words, but there was that emotional connection. Like, it's like, this is my little brother, and you're not going to talk to him like that. So I think it would have been a different emotional connection if it was brother to brother. And I hark on the emotion because that's just the passion, right?
Yeah, very good. If you kind of carry this out, really some of the themes, or at least a couple of them, really suggested that there was parental neglect going on for your, participants.
Right.
Not necessarily because they were that kind of parents, but anytime there's a particular medical problem or something like that. How do you think that has affected or will affect these women in, adulthood, in their own relationships and their own family systems?
Right. Yeah, I think it already does. Two of the women were married, and both of those women admitted that there were problems that their spouse had pointed out that they had brought with them from their family of origin, that they had, you've got to deal with this for us to have a healthy marriage. So I think these women carry some of these beliefs and worldviews. That being said, none of the women I interviewed had children, so that made it even more homogenous group. They carried that belief about this is how the world works. Like, my sister is in need of my help, and they carry it to their marriage, and then their spouse goes, no, I don't need your help. I love you, and I want to be married to you. We can do this arm in arm together, but I don't need you, not like that. And that brings up therapeutic issues, right? Like, somebody needs to, talk this through with a professional. Another example was one of the young ladies admitted that she had actually gone to her parents and said, this is not fair. You're giving her all this attention. And it was actually triggered by an instance where the sister with autism would not talk to mom. So mom paid her to come home from school and talk to her, which we think, really? But it worked. So, I'm not judging it because it worked. But then the neurotypical sister said, this is not fair. I'm being neglected. And mom looked at her and said, you're not being neglected. You are two different people with two different sets of issues. So there's some awareness of that neglect as defined by my subjects. Again, probably not like reported defects, but like, I have hurt feelings that I need as an adult to deal with, and I need professional help for that. And that was why the recommendation for professional counseling. But yeah, that was a great question, Dr. Thomas.
Yeah, I think that obviously, and you put that in your data, but counseling for these sisters really are critical, or siblings in general. I would think, but the whole idea, they don't have voices. Even the one that voiced this isn't fair really got to, hey, just understand it's different. No attunement or empathy.
Right.
And then, how do you interpret? This is my last question. How do you interpret the camouflaging? Until I read your dissertation, I hadn't heard of that either.
Right.
And so how do you interpret that and the impact of that on the sisters? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think part of the camouflaging is social pressure, because we go on the internet and we see people at their vacation site, and we think, then I could have that. I could have that new car or that beach vacation. So part of it's social pressure. So this young lady is sitting on the playground in 5th grade, and she's seeing the other girls do whatever activity is on the playground, and they don't understand, but they believe that if I go up there and act, that I can be included in the group. So there's some measure of social pressure. There's also some measure of self-preservation, right? It's always this idea of, and with guys probably more than girls, of if I don't push back, they're not going to take me serious. Not physically, well, sometimes physically, but not physically push back. But like, if I don't go and get involved, they're not going to take me serious. They're going to ignore me like the wallflower. And so it's a survival thing at some level. Because I can go home and my parents baby me, but then I go to school and I get ignored. And I've got how many more years? 7 more years of this. And so there's some survival elements to the camouflaging, which I can respect. And I think that's probably one of the few reasons why that phrase camouflaging works, because there's plenty of criticism about why it's not not the best term to describe this attempting to appear neurotypical. But it's, Dr. Thomas, it is so fascinating. There's so many places to go with that camouflaging concept, that attempting to appear neurotypical, and it will eventually go beyond autism. We'll see it as a concept in things like ADHD, probably even things like OCD at some point, because there's a lot of utility in that. I don't remember what the other part of your question was.
Well, that was kind of it. I mean, I think you identified that there's needs we all have, right? The part of the group, belonging, relation, all these other things are still there, but much more of a barrier.
Right.
And the role that the sister may play in that. So anyway, total sum, bottom line is, I really thought you did a great job. The data was immense to read, and I can't imagine for you going through that. So kudos.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I echo Dr. Thomas as well. Just really great work, Will. Just a couple comments, and then I have 2 application questions. So I love that you love transcribing. Yay. Not. Okay. Terrible joke. Okay. It wasn't even a joke, but yes, we all could, if I did a qualitative and I remember transcriptions, but thank you for living through that and being able to tell it.
Yes.
Well, on a serious note, I genuinely not surprised by this, but I thank you for honoring the voices of your participants. We can hear it as you share, and that, I mean, yes, it's part of your counseling skills, but even as a researcher, thank you for holding that space. One, whilst you were getting, critical information, but you honored, it was like the sacred story of them being able to just talk and share, and just really powerful that you did that in that way. So thinking about you as a counselor educator, this is a counselor educator degree.
Right.
How might you apply this research to maybe one of the 2 competency areas, whether it's a teaching? So thinking of you teaching master students, how might this degree, how would this research maybe look like in any of your classes as you teach it? And then similarly, as a supervisor, how might what you've gleaned from this inform a supervision for you?
Yeah, I think the big picture that we often miss is that gender does matter, because even in this example with autism, there is somebody somewhere said that's autism, even though it doesn't look like it, and it began a debate, a decades-long debate that we're sitting here in 2021 still carrying on, going, there's a unique female autism phenotype. So I think part of it as a counselor educator is looking at things like DSM, looking at things like our tests and measures, and going, does gender affect this? And if so, in what way? And being conscientious that it's never perfect. It's not like a Lego set. It's never perfect. Diagnosis is difficult. Dr. Raque and I have done a lot of diagnosing, and it is difficult. My goodness, I couldn't even begin to say, but gender matters. Gender matters. I think age matters too, but I think this piece of research knocks on that gender door more than anything. Taking that to the classroom is looking at these master students going, this is important. it's important for you to think about a second time over. Who are you looking at? This is not just a single sheet test that people filled in the bubbles and there's results, but who is that person that you're looking at, and letting it be a little personal. Let it be a little personal enough that I'm not making bad decisions or making quick decisions, not bad, making quick decisions. Supervision, I love supervision. I think y'all know my gift tends towards teaching. I often say I have that spiritual gift of teaching. Dr. Joy can rebuttal if she wishes.
No, you do.
But it's one of those things where I'm looking at this supervisor, I'm looking at this young lady at my clinic now. We have 2 young ladies who are working towards their license. I'm looking at this young lady going, yes, but what about gender? What about age? What about co-occurring disorders? Because this piece of research hits on a larger problem that we have in our field of a quick label. I just want to get a label on there for insurance purposes and then start treatment. And as important as treatment is, we need to get it right. We need to get that whatever that is right. And I say that because I'm thinking of the 2 women who were not diagnosed till they were adults. And as I said, one of them was only diagnosed because of her eating disorder, sent her to a clinic because she had not been eating. She was labeled anorexic and was receiving treatment before she ever got any kind of attention for autism. That should have been caught a lot earlier. That should have been. And our supervisees need to hear those kind of stories and step back and go, is this eating disorder just about trying to fit in, which is a camouflaging thing, just trying to fit in, or is there something else? Oh my gosh, there is, oh, there's a whole world out there when it comes to understanding human behavior. Wow.
Absolutely. I think you not only nailed your answer, I think you answered teaching. I heard you entered supervision, but I even hear in your voice this piece of advocacy. You're like, wait a minute, these are individuals. This is a person. And I just love that. Excellent work, Will.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I echo everything. After 20 years of working with this population, I told Will before we got started that as I was reading this, siblings would pop in my head from 2003, 2005, 2007. Like, oh my gosh, that's what she was going through. And I could remember the families. And so, that camouflaging piece, much like how the culture misses depression and suicidality in girls, because if they're quiet and they're to themselves, they're good girls. And, the ramifications of this, which you highlighted, are just huge. Mm-hmm. My question, more curious, was there any countertransference that you experienced in doing these interviews with your subjects? Any strong emotional reactions in you as you heard their stories as a counselor who's not their counselor? I just wondered if any of that popped up.
Yeah, I think going back to Dr. Thomas's point, if it had been brothers, there would have been more of that. I think the things that hit me were the 2 women that were married and talking about how their marriage has been impacted by this. As a married man, and I look at it and I'm like, okay, I can find that common ground there. I would like to think I was safe transference wise because I was talking to women about women, but I'm talking about siblings. And I guess it did hit me having a little brother. It did hit me at some level when they were talking about trying to connect with their sibling, younger or older, and there was no back. There was no giving. It was like the river only flowed one way. I don't know. Those kind of stand out. The marriage thing, and then the one way, the non-reciprocal. Because I couldn't imagine. I mean, my brother and I were super active together, played baseball together, kind of the whole 9 yards. And I couldn't imagine it having been one way. Like I gave and never got back. But yeah. Not that I'm a marriage expert, but Dr. Raque, it will be 18 years this year. 18. I've got you. I got you. He had me working on his wedding day. That's how dedicated I was to work.
Yeah. So again, highlighting that, that camouflaging piece has ramifications not only for the work with autism, but any type of special needs, regardless of the challenge impacts,
I think we'll
parents
see
and
more of that in developmental disorders. If we just took the whole developmental disorder chapter out of DSM, I think we'll eventually see that in each of those. So low IQ.
How many of you guys have seen, I work with a lot of kids too that have diagnoses of ADHD. I don't know how many of you have experienced, like when your kids get home after school and they have ADHD, how just truly exhausted they are, like, and emotional, right? Their parents ask them to do something and they have a meltdown because they've just used all of their resources to sort of just be able to, and using that term, camouflage their inadequacies or their challenges with their attention, that they just can't do it anymore. And that's, I think that's interesting. I was thinking about that when you were talking about the camouflaging. I've got to go. I want to say great. I was going to put something in the chat, but I'll just say great. Thank you for including me, Will. It was awesome to be here, and great job. And nice to meet you all as well. And
yes, great to meet you, Dr. Raque.
Yeah, glad to be a part of. We always consider it important to be a part of people's training. So one of the things we love doing here is having undergraduate interns, graduate interns, and people like Will that we get to see, go through their professional career and develop into where you're at now. So great job, buddy. And I look forward to hearing more of what you're doing. Stay in touch.
Yep. Thanks for coming.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
And I also need to go now, but I must say I'm thankful to be invited, and well, I congratulate you, and great job there too, as everyone else, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for inviting me. And it was nice to meet everyone else too. Wonderful to see this going on in the academic world with liberty and everything. So thank you.
Yep. Okay, Dr. Debbie.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and I didn't know about the camouflaging thing, but as soon as I saw it, and then went right to the literature, it really reflected so much on, like I said, in thinking of the families I'd worked with, and so important for parents to understand in this. And I know in your directives for future research or applications where this could be, you highlighted the family, but for parents to understand this process. And I was also struck by the sub-level issues that kind of go under the radar until you talk to a sibling. For instance, the shared interest and putting up with all of the shenanigans. And I think you're right in Dr. Thomas's question about what's the difference between boys and girls. Female siblings are more likely, I think, to withstand that extra mile kind of mentality and have more cushion. But then also being the emotional flotation device for their sibling and the outlet for their stress. And much like Dr. Raque said, as I work a lot with older teens and young adults now, there's this autistic regression that happens as soon as, this dynamic young person. I'm helping out currently with a autism swim group, and there's a lifeguard and I that put that together. And her son, who's 21, is on this in our group. And I mean, you should see this guy. He is directing the swim. He's like some people think he's a coach. And then he walks in the door of his home and turns into a 5-year-old. And so you know, this, because he's exhausted. He's putting up this veneer. And so just so many, you know, the parentification of this. And he has a younger sister who's 5 years younger, and yet she kind of takes over as mom number 2 when he gets home, because mom is also exhausted.
Right.
Exhausted. So, and then the co-occurring phenomenons, all of the stuff that goes along with it. I was just so impressed with this. So,
that's so fascinating, because another of the subjects talked about how her sister wasn't diagnosed until college because she failed out of college. She at home, she's a high functioning person. At school, she was high functioning because she had her place. She can come back home and somebody could take the emotional dumping. But then she goes to college and just stops going to class and fails out the first semester. And it's how does this straight A student flunk out their first semester of college? Well, lo and behold, she's autistic, and it was missed for 18 years. I guess maybe since the flare is not on fire, you know, like with a boy with autism, it's not like, oh yeah, we need to do something about that. Instead, she's at least academically doing great. And so let's not rock the boat and talk about her lack of social. Let's just send her to college. And it did not help. It just, you know, she comes back home emotionally destroyed because she couldn't do it. And and she turns into, you said, that 5-year-old.
And that's my passion now with, you know, working with young adults and older teens, that self-development piece that is often missed in autism spectrum work. There's all, you know, everything's on social skills, which encourage the camouflaging a lot of times. And then there's the, you know, occupational therapy and the physical therapy and the speech therapy and all this stuff and ABA. But yet the sense of self is, you know, who, like a player on the basketball court, if my coach is watching me, I'll perform, but if nobody's around, I don't know what to do. And so to help them transition to that next phase. So as I read this, I mean, I'm just jumping up and down and seeing so many outlets for you. Will and I discussed, you know, this is unlimited in your writing ability for future publication, presentations at conferences, and then, as Dr. Joy said, you know, bringing this knowledge into a class, and you know, it's just so valuable. So you mentioned a little bit in your presentation, just the journey. So just expand, just take a few minutes, tell us how you've grown, your experience in this year or longer.
Yes. Yeah. And I appreciate how Liberty has it designed, because in the summer we did Volk's class, you know, dissertation class, and he had us write chapter 1, or at least start chapter 1, 2, and 3. And that was quite the hurdle, because again, I've heard from you guys. I had Dr. Thomas when I was a master's student. I still have your DVDs. We can laugh about that later. But in the PhD program, it was dissertations coming. Think about it. Be conscientious of it. Be aware of it. And I say this in my dissertation. You've read it. This is something God wanted for me, not I for myself. In some real ways, I felt like Paul on the road to Damascus. Like God was not going to let me get up until I completed that little vignette to submit to Liberty for, you know, for their consideration, kind of thing. I graduated from Liberty in December of 2012, and it was 16. It was 2016 before I came back, and again, it was class dissertation. Think about it. And I'd started a job where we were seeing at the clinic I'm at now, where we see a lot of people with autism, and I thought, okay, that's it. There's room in that field or in that area of study to go, and so I thought it would be. We all do. I thought it would be easy. Dr. Thomas, you've done it twice. I mean, I thought it would be easy. It was not. It was unpleasant. It was very unpleasant. There were times when it was just kind of like, this is not worth it. This is not. But yeah, as I got in there, when I finally got to interview these women, is when that was it. That was the top of the whatever. I was up there, and it was like, this is it. But there was a lot of prayer. I interviewed all the women in February of this year, and there was December and January. There was a lot of prayer. It was just like, God, sending me these people. I don't know where they're going to come from. Send me these people, and they just came. They showed up, and it was all God. Again, I didn't want this for myself. He wanted this for me. And there were lots of prayers in there where I was like, God, if you want this for me, you're going to have to provide time off. You're going to have to provide money for tuition. You're going to have to provide subjects. And he always did. And it's not a bragging thing. Every semester I would pray, God, if you want me to take these classes, you got to provide the money. Because I have no debt. I don't borrow money. I don't need to. I have a good job. Well, I don't need this, whatever this is. And so I didn't borrow for tuition, for travel, for whatever. I came to Lynchburg. I made great friends. A lot of y'all know Eric. I would stay with Eric, and, free rent. I'd take him out for steak on Monday night or whatever. I made great friends. I love them to death. And God provided everything, just absolutely everything, up until even now. I mean, he just provided everything. I went to Dr. Thomas, and I was like, Dr. Thomas, this is what I want to do. Autism, blah, blah, blah. And Dr. Thomas was like, I know a guy. And he gave me Dr. Hull's email address, I think. And it was just, God's provided everything along the way. And so often, I taught Sunday school this past Sunday, and I was talking about prayer. And I said, so often we see the miracle and don't respect it as a miracle. We don't see it as a miracle. We see it as, this is how life is, and it's not. It's absolutely God's hand going, come this way, and it's God's hand moving, and even when we don't want it. And Scripture teaches us this. Long before we even knew who He was, He came to us. He called out to us. He cried for us to come and be saved. When we did not want Him, He came for us. And that's just been this journey, this 5-year journey from 2016 until now, of God going, I want this for you, and I'm going to use you in this way and that way. And I feel like God's going to put me in a school somewhere to teach, and that's fine too. As much as I love private practice, and I do, and those two doctors you just saw were colleagues from private practice. I love them, and I love the work, but I realize, the next 40 years are going to be something else. Something besides what the last have been, and research is a part of that, and I'm okay with that too. Now that I'm on the other side,
Nice. Yeah.
I'm like,
great.
I can do this now. I can do this.
Yeah.
It's like swimming for the first time. You finally get to the other side of the pool, and you're like, I can do this.
Well,
Yes.
there's a lot of articles embedded in your dissertation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can get numerous ones out of that. So
Yeah.
go for
Yeah.
it.
So at this point, the committee is going to discuss. So how do we do this, Dr. Thomas? Does Will just disconnect?
Yeah, disconnect. Do you have a phone number for him?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
and
think
then
I
you'll
do.
text. This is the way we've been doing it. Text you when we finished.
Okay.
Don't go real far. Go get a drink of water, go to the bathroom.
Will, I do not have your number.
Okay. Yeah. 770-608-7659.
Got it. All
Yeah,
right.
And if I don't hear from you guys in an hour, I'll
Okay, it's going to be quicker than that.
Dr.
I got it.
Hour.
All right, so you can sign off, and then I'll text you in a few minutes.
Sure. Hey, thanks.
All right, well done. Well done.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody.
Do you want to stop recording?
Oh yeah, I guess I should, huh?
Yeah. You
Good
experienced a recording that wasn't supposed to occur.
Yeah, Dr. Joy, 11 years ago, when Dr. Thomas was my